So let's dive into this study. I'm sharing on my screen right now the chart that is in the actual paper that was published in the Journal of Cardiovascular, European Society of Cardiology in June of 2025. And it compares the two studies that they did in 2012 and 2024. So they expanded the study in 2024 to include a couple of more things, including the scoring system. So they included scores from 0 to 4, and then they did different increments a little bit differently they did in 2012. They accounted for covariates, including age, sex, and body mass index. In 2024, they added clinical variables, so they looked at people with cardiovascular disease and other kind of predisposed conditions. They did the best they could in 2024 to account for COVID-related deaths, and they almost doubled the number of people. They more than doubled the number of people who they looked at. Now, 67% of the people in the study were men, and the age range for the 2024 study was between 46 and 75 years old. So what gets really interesting is when you look over at these charts and you look at the probability of survival, and we'll look at both extremes. So if you look at the blue, that is where people scored a 10 out of 10 and their cardiovascular cause of mortality, it stays really, so probability of survival is what we're looking at on the y-axis. It stays above 90, 80%. It certainly stays above 80%. And that's for natural causes of mortality. If you look at cardiovascular causes of mortality, it stays above 90%. If you look at the other extreme, which is the red group, which is the 0 to 4 scorers, the probability of natural mortality, probability of survival drops to 30%, and probability of survival of cardiovascular cause mortality drops to, I'm going to approximate, 65%. So, in this bolded box down here, a 3.8 and 6.0 fold higher risk for mortality, respectively, for natural and cardiovascular mortalities for sit to rise of 0 to 4 versus a 10. So again, this is not a crystal ball, not a crystal ball at all, but really good indicator, really good data, really high number of people who they looked at. Yes, it was mostly men, and we'll get into kind of the faults of the study, the limitations of the study in a little bit, but mostly great data. If you look at this from a scientific perspective of like how credible is this paper, pretty credible with the way that they did it. And in reading it, and I'll post the link so you can read it if you want to, all they had participants do, and they give you the instructions, they say basically get down on the floor and stand up, use the least amount of help you think you need. And the person did it, and they were allowed a couple of attempts. They were coached a little bit. If they didn't get a 10, they were coached on, well, you can do this instead, or you can do that. And then they took the best score of those people. So from a scientific perspective, this is a pretty sound study. Of course, there are nuances to it, but pretty sound.